Hi, welcome to the Shambhala Mountain Center Science of Meditation online conference. And here we are on day one with our very first presentation with Dr. Rick Hansen. How you doing, Rick? Good to see you.
Great to be here, Philippe. Truly great.
Well, we're really excited about this, and to kick off the conference with you, it's just fabulous. So I want to share a little bit about your work with our audience, for those who don't already know about you from your book, Buddha's Brain, and others. So Dr. Hansen is a psychologist, and I think you could probably be, you'd probably accept being called a neuropsychologist as well. A senior fellow at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Founder of the Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, through which Dr. Hansen is bringing the benefits of current neuroscience, brain science, really into the mainstream in very practical ways. So all of us can really benefit and bring these insights and practices and discoveries to our own lives in really simple, straightforward, practical ways. And so I encourage everyone in our audience to check out the Wellspring Institute. And Dr. Hansen is a New York Times best-selling author. His books are available in 26 languages. In 2000, he's best known probably, at least for his first book in 2009, Buddha's Brain, and which discussed a lot of the neuroscience and what we understand about mindfulness and working with our mind in that way from a science perspective. Then in 2011, Just One Thing, Developing a Buddha Brain, One Simple Practice at a Time. And clearly a book full of practical applications, as its title conveys. And then your most recent book, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, I'm looking forward to, Hardwiring Happiness, The New Brain Science of Contentment, Calm, and Confidence. So again, welcome, Rick.
Great.
So I think we're going to kick it off. This first day of the Science of Meditation Conference is focused on attention and relaxation. So why is attention important? And even just in terms of our day-to-day lives, what's the big deal about attention?
Right. It's a great opening question. And I go back to the title of the conference itself, The Science of Meditation. And the root of the word of science is knowing what is true, seeing clearly. And it's interesting that, as you know, the root of the word for Buddha is to know, to see what's true, and to penetrate through ignorance, delusion, and confusion, which creates so much suffering and harm for ourselves and other people. So it is very interesting to think of the common roots of the, if you will, Western tradition of science, which is now, of course, global, and the more Eastern traditions of contemplative practice, including exemplified by Buddhism, that are both grounded fundamentally in the same trunk of the tree of knowing. So how do we know? Well, we know fundamentally by placing our attention on something. You know, there's the old line, you are what you eat. Actually, the modern update, based on what's called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, is that you are what you pay attention to, and more exactly, what you do with what you pay attention to. Because attention, in terms of its functions for us as biological, embodied creatures, living animals, attention functions as like a vacuum cleaner with a spotlight on it. It illuminates what it rests upon and then sucks it into our brain. Because in the traditional saying, the mind takes its shape from what it repeatedly rests upon. The modern update would be your brain, and therefore much, if not all of you, fundamentally, your experience of living takes its shape from what your mind rests upon. So therefore, getting regulation over and real-time mindfulness of where your attention is being placed is incredibly useful. There's kind of a famous saying in brain science, neurons that fire together, wire together. And that process of structure building and lasting change, where we hardwire into ourselves what we are paying attention to, is really turbocharged for what's in the field of consciousness. So I think that's why, just to finish here, it's so important to be able to get some kind of awareness of where your attention goes, especially in the world that we live in, which is grabbing attention and pulling it in all kinds of different directions. And then based on what your attention rests upon, practicing skillfully with what's there. so that over time, bit by bit by bit, as the Buddha guides us and as all kinds of other great teachers and modern scientists and psychologists today guide us, you can gradually nudge yourself over time, bit by bit, in a better and better direction, for your own sake and the sake of other beings.
So our brain is, in essence, really a self-organizing, even self-correcting learning machine of sorts. And really what it learns depends on what we feed it, what we expose it to.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. William James, kind of the godfather of psychology in America, said, or wrote rather, over a century ago, the education of attention would be the education par excellence. And to be clear here, if you just kind of make it concrete, right now, people listening are having experiences, right? And sensations in the body, thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams, sorrows, suffering, and happiness, right? We're having experiences. What are the causes of those experiences? Well, locally, those causes are being continually constructed by, constrained by, and conditioned by the nervous system, headquartered in the brain. Now, those processes are embedded in a larger network of causes, which is embedded in an even vaster network of causes, including nature and human culture and all the rest of that. And it's very possible that among those causes are transcendental or supernatural influences outside of the natural frame. I'll try to stay mainly inside, if not entirely inside the natural frame as we're talking here. That said, even though we're part of this vast web or network of causes, locally, the final common pathway of most, if not all of those causes runs right between your ears. And scientists are getting clearer and clearer and clearer about the underlying neural functions and structures that are the basis for our most intimate experiences of being alive. So as we'll get into, I'm sure, a little further, by knowing a little bit more about what's going on under the hood, as it were, in very practical ways, you can reach down inside those structures and functions. And through mental activity alone, not drugs, not surgery, no electrodes are involved in this experiment, you can actually gradually stimulate and therefore strengthen, since neurons that fire together wire together, those characteristics in yourself that you want to encourage, including the fundamental superpower of mindfulness and attention itself. That's really, really helpful for me and very, very optimistic.
Absolutely. So, for example, our audience right now, and even you and I, we're involved in this discussion. Our audience is witnessing, listening to the discussion. So we're very visually and auditorily oriented at the moment, very cognitively oriented. The main place the emphasis of our brain activity kind of along that midline, right? This is a question, but if we all make an effort, and I think I would invite our audience to do so as we're listening, to be aware of our body, to feel the contact between our body and the chair, to feel our feet on the ground, to have a more embodied approach to sitting here and engaging or listening to this dialogue, that would shift something. In other words, by expanding our attention, that would shift something in terms of what's going on with our brain. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think back to, in a sense, what we're resting attention on is our most fundamental property, in a sense. I mean, we can have an intimacy with our own experience here, particularly, again, in a larger context for lots of reasons. Others, corporations, political forces, media, all the rest of that, workplace demands are continually trying to take that property. In other words, where we put our attention, which is the essence really of autonomy and self-reliance. So if we're going to be in some old-fashioned kind of way, self-reliant, rugged, resilient, and able to do good things for ourselves as well as for the greater good of the world at large, we need to have some kind of internal autonomy in terms of where we put attention and how we relate to what we put attention on. So if, as you say, we help attention open and widen to include the whole of the body, literally, you're right. Activity starts to shift from midline processes in the cortex that are typically involved with focused attention or being kind of lost in thought and daydreaming. And instead, if we open into the body as a whole, if we kind of widen the spotlight of attention, if you will, we start engaging networks on the sides of the cortex, on the sides of the brain, especially the right side for right-handed people and roughly half of all left-handed people, because the right side of the brain is specialized for gestalt or holistic processing. So if you go more into open awareness of the whole gestalt, let's say of your body, and then even broader, the whole of experience altogether, you naturally start engaging those lateral networks, which are very involved in present moment mindful awareness, little sense of the future or the past, less sense of self, by the way. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of me, myself, and I, supported by those midline activities. And as you move more into that lateral mode, you calm down this midline activity, which does tend to spend a lot of time, worrying about the future and, resenting or self-criticizing about the past. And that's very tracked in real time by modern studies and with repetition, since neurons that fire together wire together. As you repeatedly go into that lateral mode of open presence, grounded in the body, really being here right now, at the leading edge of now, the front edge of now, just here, receiving the next moment with an intimacy with your own experience. As you do that, you strengthen those circuits. So you become more able to move back and forth at will. There's a place for midline activity, goal-directed more in the front, just kind of, daydreaming or casually thinking about stuff in the back. But on the other hand, boy, is there a place for being able to do what those lateral networks enable us to do, which is a quality of real grounded presence and really being here as the whole of ourselves, receiving the next moment.
Well, Evan, it seems pretty clear that marketers, the media advertisers, social media developers, and so forth have learned how to train our attention.
Yeah.
How about ourselves? Can we learn to train our own attention?
Yeah, there's much research about meditation in particular and mindfulness in general as a way to train attention. And we become more able, many studies show, to place our attention on what we care about, pull our attention away from things that we don't care about so much, and become less driven by stimulation hunger. This need for the next thing, right? To help ourselves feel filled up. And in the process of that kind of attention training, there's some measurable changes in neural structure or function that are very interesting. I'll go through some of them kind of quickly here. They're both really cool, and they illustrate the fruits of practice, which is good for many reasons, including helping to motivate ourselves to, keep going, keep doing it. And by the way, you don't have to be a perfect meditator. You don't have to go on beyond retreat all the time. A lot of little things add up over time, but there's a technical term in neuropsychology, mo better, more better. In other words, more episodes of practice and more depth of engagement in your episodes of practice, which will go, especially the latter two, what I have a particular interest in, helping yourself turbocharge your growth curve. In other words, helping yourself when you are engaged in practice to really receive the fruits into yourself in a lasting way. They ultimately get hardwired into your own body rather than simply having some kind of beneficial experience that doesn't make any lasting difference. And I'm sure we'll get to that more later. Meanwhile, how does meditation practice or mindfulness practice more generally change the brain? One, it tends to increase activation of the left prefrontal regions relative to right prefrontal regions. This is switched for roughly half of all left-handed people, but I'll just speak about the majority of people here. And that's good because your left prefrontal cortex is involved in approaching the good rather than avoiding the bad, which is more the province of the right hemisphere of the brain. And the left hemisphere of the brain, or particularly left frontal, is also more involved in the regulation of negative emotion, putting the brakes on fear or anger or feeling hurt or ashamed. So you get more positive experiences, more well-being when you increase the strength of your brakes. And that's one of the reliable results of even something like just an 8-week MBSR course or even some shorter programs. Another benefit is that if you repeatedly meditate, you tend to build up cortex, layers of tissue. You thicken it building up more synaptic connections and bringing more blood flow to parts of the brain in the frontal regions that help regulate attention and emotion and action kind of top down. And also you build up cortex in a part of the brain, I'm pointing to my temporal lobes here, on the inside of the temporal lobes called the insula, which is important because it helps us tune into ourselves. And that's what you're doing when you're meditating, right? You're regulating attention, you're building up that muscle right behind your forehead, and you're also tuning into yourself. You're building up that muscle too. That's the insula. And you become more self-aware, and you get a bonus benefit because the insula is very involved in empathy for the feelings of others. And that's really good. All right, so that's a very reliable result. Another third major result is that you build up more tissue in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is good because it puts things in context and calms down the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. That's another really nice, reliable benefit. Also, people with long-term practice tend to increase activation of what are called gamma wave brainwaves, gamma range brainwaves. That's important because gamma is fast, roughly 30 to 80 beats per second. That means you're synchronizing millions, potentially billions, literally, of synapses. So they're all firing synchronously 30 to 80 times a second. That means that they're really integrated with each other. And that supports that sense of wholeness and integration that develops over time with meditation. Traditionally, sometimes it's called as a factor, unification of consciousness, singleness of mind. That's another result from long-term practice. And then the last result I'll just mention here, in addition to more bodily results, improving the immune system, calming down the stress response, faster recovery from being upset, that's kind of the body altogether. But just in terms of the brain, there are these little widgets at on the ends, if you will, of DNA molecules called telomeres. And telomeres, sometimes pronounced telomeres, but I'll say telomeres, they get shorter as we get older. I don't know about you, Fleet, but I'm actually getting older. Who knew, right? And so as we get older, telomeres shrink, and as they shrink, we become more vulnerable to age-related illnesses of various kinds. Well, some recent findings have shown that meditative practice helps protect telomere lengths, these strips of atoms on the end of a super complicated molecule of DNA, so that we're more able to go into old age, gracefully and living well. It's interesting, finish here, if the great pharmaceutical companies, great in terms of size, Merck, Pfizer, whatnot, if they could patent meditation already based on the proven health benefits of meditation, we'd be seeing ads for meditation every night on television, and arguably even more ads than we're seeing for antidepressants or other things. I don't know if they'd replace the Viagra ads, etc., but we'd be seeing tons and tons of ads for meditation because of absolutely solid evidence for its benefits for physical and mental health.
It can be a little dangerous to start talking about mindfulness as a panacea for all human ills, but the science is really showing that if it could be put in a pill, we'd be investing billions of dollars in it. There's no question.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So in terms of attention, as you've mentioned and alluded to, we do pay attention to threats, to things that are alarming. We know that our media is full of negativity. I know you've been known for somewhat popularizing this idea developed by two researchers, I think at the University of Pennsylvania, called the negativity bias. So could you talk a little bit about that and how attention is related to the formation of that, and then what we can do about that?
That's right. People who are interested in this can just Google the term negativity bias. They'll pull up probably scores and scores of references, including a really nice literature review that I'm fond of because it's well written, unlike a lot of papers in social science research. Is called Bad is Stronger Than Good. And it's this very basic idea that makes complete sense intuitively. Think about it at a personal level. At your work, 10 things happen in the day, 9 are positive, 1 is negative. What's the one you tend to think about and talk about, or you obsess about as you're falling asleep? Or your boss gives you a performance review, 19 points of praise, 1 out of 20, room for improvement. again, what's the one you think about? It's the bad news, right? And that makes sense in evolution because as our ancestors were evolving over 3.5 billion years, especially the last 650 million years as multi-celled creatures, and especially the last 600 million years of the evolution of the nervous system, which includes, of course, the development of mammals and then primates, hominids, early humans, and us. Down that long run, our ancestors had to both get carrots, food, mating opportunities, etc., and they needed to avoid sticks like predators, natural hazards, or aggression inside their band or between bands. Both are important, but if you fail to get a carrot today, you'll have a chance of one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid that stick today, whack, no more carrots forever. So we have a brain, to your point about attention, that routinely does 5 things, which creates a 6th. 1, we scan for bad news, outside us and inside us, tracking the state of the body, what's going on in the psyche, what's the bad news, right? 2, when we find the bad news, we over-focus upon it. That's why theories of positive emotion start with the word broaden, because when we're experiencing emotionally positive moments, we tend to broaden to see the whole field of awareness. But when there's something negative, when there's one tile in the mosaic of reality, including our inner body sensations or mental activity that starts flashing red, whoop, that spotlight of attention zeroes down upon it. There you go. 3rd, we overreact to that flashing red light. If you play 2 sounds for people in an MRI, one is pleasant, one is unpleasant, but both are equally intense, equally loud, wing, the brain reacts more to the unpleasant one. And then 4th, that whole negative package is fast-tracked into memory, especially emotional memory, somatic memory, body memory, social memory. Once burned, twice shy. We remember negative information about others more than positive information. A few experiences of helplessness really are very hard to undo. We need many, many times as many positive experiences of efficacy and agency to overcome those things, to feel more like a hammer and less like a nail as we go through life. And then in the 5th thing the brain does, a vicious cycle develops in which the stress hormone cortisol, released when we're irritated or stuck in traffic or, dealing with a sibling's quarrel, or, we see somebody on the news whose politics bothers us, something happens. That stress hormone cortisol goes up into the brain where it turbocharges the alarm bell amygdala of the brain and gradually weakens and even kills neurons in a nearby part of the brain, the hippocampus, which I mentioned earlier, that calms down the amygdala, puts things in context, and also tells the hypothalamus to quit calling for stress hormones. Enough already. This means that stressful, upsetting, irritating experiences today, especially moderately or severely stressful, reactivating experiences today, make us more prone to getting upset the day after tomorrow, which makes us even more vulnerable the day after that. And then meanwhile, number 6, we create vicious cycles in our relationships with other people. That's the negativity of the bias of the brain, which makes it, as I say, like Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good. That's designed by evolution. It's not our fault. It worked back in the Serengeti. It may work today on a battlefield, or if you grow up in a home that feels like a battlefield. But for most people, because Mother Nature is tilted towards survival, but not quality of life, it functions as a kind of well-intended learning disability because we've got a brain designed for peak performance in Stone Age conditions. And as a result, it creates a lot of excess suffering and conflict and harm. So, finishing here, if we tilt toward the genuine, factually based good news in life, the good news in the world around us, flowers are blooming, someone is happy somewhere. Today, no bomb went off in my pizza parlor. Someone likes me at the deli or the coffee shop. I got an email done. I can recognize some goodness in myself, not positive thinking. I don't believe in that. Not pie in the sky, and never denying what is actually problematic or harmful or painful or bad, quote unquote, in reality. But tilting toward the positive to correct for this bias, to just level the playing field. And also because, as we'll get into, when you tilt toward the objectively valid, beneficial, good moments in life, you have an opportunity then, because that's where your attention is resting, to take that good into yourself and thereby build up resources inside like compassion or mindfulness or kindness or self-compassion or grit, resilience, commitment to exercise, commitment to justice, commitment to your sobriety, feelings of self-worth, feelings of unconditional well-being, no matter what the conditions of the world are around you. You build up those resources inside yourself by resting your attention on beneficial experiences, most of which are at least mildly enjoyable. And thereby you correct for this bias and grow resources inside yourself just in the flow of everyday life.
Wow. Well, pretty compelling argument for really taking more responsibility or ownership over what we do with our attention. If we're predisposed to fill up our long-term memory with danger, discomfort, negativity, and that kind of focus, it seems like we need to kind of put our hands on the steering wheel a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe we can talk a bit about how we do that in terms of the quality of attention, the relation between attention and relaxation, which you've begun to refer to. A moment back, you talked about mind training or mindfulness can increase that bilateral focus can increase the gamma wave activity, which allows high-speed integration, right? But at the same time, I've often heard that relaxation is associated with slower brain waves, the delta and the delta theta kind of waves. So what is this whole relationship to? There's attention, right? But what about the quality of attention, and how does that relate to relaxation?
Yeah, that's really great. So a few key points here. The first is that nothing in what we're talking about, as you all know, is about denying or minimizing or resisting what's painful or challenging or difficult. The whole question really is, what's our relationship to it? And if we are feeling pain in the body or irritated or hurt, or we are worried about something, the question is, are you getting glued to that movie, right? Are you stuck to the screen? Then you are reinforcing it in your brain. On the other hand, are you able to step back from it, witness it, recognize it, gradually tease apart the elements of that experience? Are you able to hold it in a space of self-compassion and acceptance? Are you able to put in kind of inner shock absorbers so you don't react too quickly and pour gasoline on that fire? Are you able to sense down into deeper, younger, more vulnerable layers of yourself, uncovering them, including them, and accepting them? Are you able to do that in a relatively untroubled way? Then you're not reinforcing the negative. And if anything, what you're doing is associating to it. I call it linking. You are associating to the negative the pain, the sorrow, the difficulty, the anger, the desire to get hammered yet again tonight, or to finish the whole bag of cookies, what have you, or yell at the kids, what have you. You're not reinforcing it. You're actually associating that difficult negative stuff to untroubled, spacious, open awareness. Awareness itself is never disturbed by what it represents. Okay, and that's the first point. The second point is that we build resources inside ourselves through cultivation. I think that practice really is like a three-legged stool that has three fundamental components to it: warm-heartedness, mindfulness, and cultivation. In traditional terms, the language of early Buddhism, Pali, metta, sati, and bhavana. And many people have only two legs or even just one leg to that stool. And we really need all three. We need to have a warm-heartedness for ourselves and others. We need to sustain mindfulness so we recognize what in the world is going on. And we need to learn from our experiences. We need to develop and heal and transform and grow in the path of awakening. If it's only the growth of uncovering awakened consciousness, Buddha nature, the divine perhaps, that was always already there. In any case, it is a process of cultivation. So for me, all three are involved. And in terms of our focus here on regulating attention, in part to grow the good inside ourselves, depending on where it rests, we grow the good a lot to deal with the bad. In other words, the more challenged our life is, frankly, the more your life sucks, the more important it is to get control over your attention, rest it on things that are authentically beneficial, and then really, really, really take them inside yourself. All right. So all that said, relaxation. Relaxation really supports that quality of spacious awareness that I was describing in the very beginning, where we're not directly making wise efforts in our mind. We're not trying to nudge the contents of consciousness in one direction or another, but we really are trying to sustain the capacity to just really be with what's there, to feel it, as Pema Chodron says, to bear it. And one thing that really helps us do that is to calm the body. If the body's agitated, not relaxed, that tends to release more stress hormones. As we get more agitated, naturally, attention is more skittery because our non-human animal ancestors really needed to have skittery, vigilant attention when they were feeling, bothered by things. And so, let me just click something there. Good. So back to this. So if you calm the body, you're much more able to sustain that spacious awareness. And in your brain, you're right, you do shift brainwave patterns. But brainwaves, we're having multiple kinds of brainwaves at the same time. Some coalitions of synapses are hooking up more slowly, alpha wave type activities, say, whereas simultaneously other coalitions of synapses, and we have several hundred trillion synapses inside our brains. Amazing, right? Other coalitions of synapses are hooked up in a gamma wave place. And as an internal experience, people might have already had a sense of this in meditation or in other practices where you feel utterly integrated, present and strong, and your breathing is slow, your body's very relaxed, but you're highly alert. You feel really integrated and often awash in a kind of contented tranquility. So in other words, all that can be happening at once. And more, I think, just to finish here, to quote U Pandita, a great meditation teacher, the purpose of practice is to expand the range of experiences in which we are free. It's easy to have that feeling of tranquil strength that's contented, right? When everything's going great, when they're fluffing your hair and feeding you cookies and painting your toenails. I've never had my toenails painted, but I'm sure it's a pretty cool experience. Like, that's easy. But can you stay in that place of calm, contented strength when you're in an argument with your teenager, or you've gotten bad news from the doctor, or you've gotten a black bordered letter from the IRS, one of those, right? Can you stay in the zone? And I think that's what people do who are serious and deep in their practice. They repeatedly internalize learning experiences, getting regulation over attention, and then using that as the superpower to grow other superpowers of loving kindness inside themselves, equanimity inside themselves, joy, even bliss or rapture inside themselves as factors of awakening. And so then over time, whether they're working for social justice, we can think of examples like Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, Aung San Suu Kyi, or other less known examples, people are more and more able to deal with challenges in life, in part, finishing here using the metaphor of a sailboat, because they've gradually deepened the keel through their practice of mindfulness, which begins, as you're doing here, with the science of meditation and related practices of mindfulness. That's where we start to deepen and grow the keel in our water so that we can dare more greatly, as Brene Brown puts it. We can go out into the deep, dark blue because we trust our own deepening keel. And as the winds of life blow, they bang on us one way or another, but then we can recover a lot more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Staying with this discussion on attention and relaxation, let me ask the question rather this way. You've been kind of alluding to this capacity to simply be with what is and be in a more optimally responsive state to what is. But sometimes, from the old Zen adage to this idea of kind of going with the flow. So when I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep. And that kind of just going with the flow of life.
Yeah.
Might, really connect with relaxation, as well as some idea that we're actually present and awake in doing so. At the same time, it seems like we could talk about mindfulness and attention as a kind of mind training that could really go in the direction of kind of greater mastery over the brain, greater self-mastery, the ability to really design our life, or, want to achieve great things. And, so it seems like on the one hand, there could be this intentionality of attention where you're somewhat agenda-driven and moving in that towards kind of almost somewhat superhuman powers of attention and focus and accomplishment, or this idea is kind of relaxing and being with life.
It's a beautiful question. Frankly, on the one hand, a lot of the people who teach, just relax and just drop into who you are, they say that from the perspective of 30 years of profound practice, And for a lot of people, if they just go with the flow, they yell at the kids, they kick the dog, and they bang down a six-pack while channel surfing. And so, on the one hand, I think our deepest nature is Buddha nature, and I think there's a lot of evidence for that, and we can talk maybe more about that. On the other hand, we have a lot of habitual tendencies to tilt negative, the negativity bias, or we've acquired learning through painful experiences, growing up in different situations, going to school in different situations, or living in a culture that has a drivenness to it and a craziness to it. But it lacks a lot of the traditional forms of community and social support that helped buffer the challenges of life in times past. So for me, both are true. One aspect of practice is just sitting, shikantaza in Zen, let's say, just sitting, just resting, utterly accepting, utterly present. But to be able to do that for more than a breath or two, you've got to grow resources inside yourself, because for most people, that's a very unnatural thing to do for more than a breath or two. I think there are rare beings who can just, boom, completely drop. But for most people, to be able to just rest in that way, they need to train in mindfulness and in meditation, like we're talking about here. They need to build up resting state relaxation, or the capacity to recover rapidly and return to good resting state relaxation. They also need to build up a warm-heartedness toward themselves, and a capacity to relate to their drives, to their needs and desires in a way that doesn't hijack them. There's no accident that the second noble truth is the ways in which suffering is caused by craving. And craving is caused in a neuropsychological, neurobiological framework by a sense of imbalance or deficit inside, disturbance and deficit inside, rather than balance and fullness. And so, to your larger point, I think that there's, in practice, a place for improving our perception so that in real time we can be more and more mindful of details of our experience, more and more able to track impermanence in real time, more and more able to track the interdependent arising of things in real time. That's why training and concentration, and some of your, I believe, presenters will get into, is really, really important, because then you you turn that spotlight into a laser and you can really see what's going on. So there's a place for that. But on the other hand, I think that a lot of modern practitioners, especially in the West, have underemphasized the motivational aspects of practice, the parts that have to do with drives or needs or goals, how we lean into the next moment, or where we come from as the next moment lands upon us. And again, the Buddha really emphasized, we have the Four Noble Truths are essentially his drive theory of suffering. There's nothing metaphysical or supernatural in any one of those Four Noble Truths. They are really down to earth. And so I've been very interested, as I think you're kind of implying in your question, you're getting at this, I've been very interested in how we can really face our craving nature, including subtleties of craving. Subtle forms of anxiety in terms of our needs for safety, subtle forms of drivenness, looking for something new to want in terms of our needs for satisfaction, and also subtle forms of resentment and hurt and clinging, having to do with our fundamental needs for connection. And through repeated practice of stabilizing and resting your attention, keeping those neurons firing together on authentic moments or experiences of broadly defined safety, satisfaction, and connection through repeatedly internalizing those wholesome experiences into yourself through practices I explore a lot, taking in the good, staying with the experience, absorbing it into yourself, even linking it to some relevant, related negative material that is the natural antidote for. As you repeatedly do that over and over and over again, combined with related practices of perception and insight, you gradually become less and less driven by craving. Those forces inside your very real animal body calm down. And instead, more and more, you can meet challenges to safety or satisfaction or connection from a place in which you feel already peaceful and contented and loving inside, even when the world is difficult. But you can't do that, as we're talking about here, unless you get some control over your attention, unless you develop your mindfulness.
So without mindfulness and the wakefulness that mindfulness can support, going with the flow could very much just be being driven by our conditioned impulse or even instinct to avoid discomfort and pain and seek pleasure and comfort in a very unconscious way. And it seems in the beginning, I think for most of us as beginning meditators and mindfulness practitioners, we need a more structured technique where we're placing our attention on an object of mindfulness, whether it's the breath or the body, whatever it might be, noticing when it wanders, bringing it back again and again, exercising that muscle you were talking about. Yeah. But with time, that capacity to maybe rest in a less structured kind of awareness, a pure awareness or a present moment attention. Maybe you could say something about that in terms of the science of attention training.
Yeah.
And whether we bring an altruistic motivation to that or not. As you know, that's the hallmark of the Mahayana traditions, but of course it's there about all Buddhist traditions include that altruistic motivation. Yeah. So do we know scientifically a difference between simply training our attention, training our focus, or when we bring an altruistic motivation to doing the same?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah. The first thing is that to be able to sustain present moment awareness, which is, I think, the fundamental traditional as well definition of mindfulness, sustained present moment awareness of both the inner and the outer world. Just because mindfulness does not mean simply self-awareness, it means awareness altogether, okay? To be able to do that is not that easy, as many people have noticed. Breath, shopping list, right? So there is good research as well as common sense experience that shows that as you increase warm-heartedness, your own warm-heartedness for other beings, as you increase your own benevolent intention, or also as you feel that you are receiving more warm-heartedness. Love is love, whether it's flowing in or flowing out. As you feel more connected to others, as you feel more embedded in a social field, as you feel that you're practicing not just for your own sake, but also for others. And also, as you apply that warm-heartedness to yourself, as you bring caring and kindness and friendliness. The root of the word for metta, loving kindness in Pali, is friendship. As you bring a simple friendliness to yourself, you become much more able to downregulate stress, which drives skittery attention, and therefore you become more mindful. You also become much more resourced inside through these social experiences, these relational experiences of feeling loved and loving. You become more resourced inside and therefore more able to tolerate the painful, difficult, challenging things that sometimes surface in consciousness, and thereby become more able to sustain mindfulness. And third, since feeling loved and loving is rewarding, you start to do two things. One, you start associating the rewarding feelings of warm-heartedness with what could be fairly cool or kind of neutral mindfulness or attention or metacognition, attention to attention. So now you've got reward associated to that. So your brain is naturally more inclined to be motivated in that direction. And last, as you experience reward, in part through these social experiences that we're talking about here, warm-heartedness, practicing for the sake of others, you cultivating mindfulness as well as related results such as wisdom inside ourselves for the sake of all beings, As you do that, as you experience the rewards of that, you increase neuroplasticity. You actually increase the tendency of your nervous system to learn from the experiences it's having. You increase the likelihood through flows of dopamine and a related neurotransmitter hormone, norepinephrine, which also tends to rise as we feel rewarded, particularly with positive emotion. We get more dopamine and norepinephrine. As you do that, you increase the likelihood that you will actually cultivate the fruits of your own practice, hardwired into, embedded into lasting changes of neural function, structure and function. Isn't that great?
So we accelerate the learning process.
Yeah, that's right. You steepen your learning curve. You help your nervous system become more responsive in a wonderful positive cycle. So being mindful with a heart-oriented quality, yesterday makes you more able to learn from your experiences today and grow your own mindfulness and warm-heartedness as well, which makes you really, responsive to your experiences tomorrow. So you actually steepen your learning curve going through life in a curvilinear way.
So over time, this quality of presence in our life and with others, it has these elements of mindfulness and warm-heartedness and attentiveness and so forth, actually becomes self-sustaining in a certain way.
That's right. That's right. I know we're going to be finishing up pretty soon, and I definitely want to slip in, if I could, a couple of sayings here, traditional sayings. The first one, gosh, you would probably know better than I, Fleet. Which of the great Tibetan masters, the early masters, said it? I think it was Marpa or Milarepa. One of them. He said, looking back on his life, toward the end of his life, a life of serious practice, he said, in the beginning, nothing came. In the middle, nothing stayed. In the end, nothing left. He had fully cultivated, fully transformed, fully removed the obscurations to true nature along the way. And I think that's what we're talking about here. That's a beautiful way, for me at least, to describe the path of practice. And it also applies to different aspects of practice. Like for now, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot that, in my case, doesn't leave. I'm not fully awakened, but there's certain qualities of mine, while simultaneously there are definitely things I'm continuing to work on to try to help them stay. And there's certain things that, no matter how hard I try, are still not coming into the mind stream, but I'm really, working on those. So that's the first saying. The second saying is from Tibet as well, although you find it elsewhere around the world. If you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. And I think for me, what's the most important minute of your life? It's the next one. The minutes in the past are gone. This moment as it is already what it is. You can't do anything about it. But the next minute after minute after minute, is full of opportunity. Will we rest our attention? Will we get control of our attention with regard to the next minute so that it's not hijacked by silly stuff or distractions or internal rumination, looping? And will we be able, in the next minute, to rest our attention upon what's wholesome and thereby gradually drawing it into ourselves? That's the fundamental opportunity, and it's our responsibility, each one of us, to grow in our mindfulness so we're more able to make use of, productively, the most important minute of our life, minute after minute after minute. And then if I could close, I want to quote the Buddha here, if that's all right, in the Dhammapada. It's perhaps my favorite teaching. He says, think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. And if I could add, certainly implicit and often explicit in his own teaching, as we fill ourselves with good, we do that for our own sake. That's perfectly fine and appropriate, but we also do it for the sake of all beings, known and unknown, the great and the small, omitting none.
What a wonderful place to bring our conversation to a close. And thank you so much, Rick. This has just been a fabulous beginning to our exploration of the science of meditation and mindfulness, beginning with where we all begin, with training our attention. and understanding a great deal more about that. So this has been a great kickoff, and I'm sure will inspire a lot of the dialogues that will happen with our other teachers that are going to be presenting throughout the conference. So thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor to be here. I wish everyone well in this program. And remember that those little minutes, those little moments adding up over time can make a really big difference to your day, and then your week, your year, and your life.
Well, I really encourage all of our audience to check out the Wellspring Institute. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
The Wellspring Institute, to learn more about Dr. Hansen's work, as well as his amazing books, The Buddha's Brain, and so forth. So again, just thank you so much. This has been fabulous.